In many cyber attacks, initial access is only the beginning. In this video, we'll explore privilege escalation and explain how attackers move from limited access to higher level.
When a threat actor breaches a network using a restricted, low-level user account, they have established a tactical foothold. This entry point is the base of operations required to scan for the high-value assets stored deeper in the environment. The attacker's objective is to move beyond these initial restrictions. Without administrative control, they cannot establish persistent backdoors, exfiltrate sensitive data at scale, or deploy domain-wide ransomware. One path is horizontal escalation. Here, the attacker executes lateral movement across the network, compromising other user accounts that sit on the same privilege tier. They swap identities without gaining deeper system authority. Vertical escalation provides the attacker with total system dominance. This is the upward climb from a standard, restricted user account to the level of a domain administrator or a Linux root user. This ascent relies on exploiting the delta between an organization's intended security posture and the actual, granular misconfigurations left behind by human administrators. Defending against total system compromise requires deconstructing how attackers exploit this gap. We can map this by examining the three primary escalation vectors on a Linux system. First, file permissions. Second, pseudo-environment vulnerabilities. And third, OS kernel flaws. An attacker landing on a machine starts without context. Their first move is running basic terminal commands like who am I and ID. This confirms their starting position as a standard, unprivileged user. Escalating privileges is a process of methodological enumeration. The attacker audits reachable configuration files, active services, and user rights to find one overlooked vulnerability. To accelerate this, attackers deploy automated enumeration scripts like linpiece. In seconds, these scripts scan thousands of parameters, flagging anomalies like internally exposed services or automated background tasks running with root privileges. In Active Directory environments, tools like Bloodhound ingest the web of user rights and permissions. The tool filters out the noise to map a singular, unbroken path from the compromised account directly to the domain admin. This is known as graph theory enumeration. It takes millions of overlapping permission data points and it calculates the absolute shortest mathematical path to reach elevated privileges. Through enumeration, the opaque internals of the operating system become a precise roadmap of exploitable vectors. The first major vector on that roadmap involves file permissions, specifically targeting critical password repositories. In Linux, user passwords are mathematically hashed and stored in the /etc/shadow file. By design, only the root user can read this file. But occasionally, an administrator makes a critical error, granting standard users read access. If an enumeration script flags this error, the attacker can read the file and extract the encrypted password hashes for every account on the machine. They copy these hashes to their own machine, combining them with the standard /etc/password file using a tool called unshadow. This prepares the data format for offline password cracking. The prepared file is then fed into a GPU-accelerated cracking tool like Hashcat. The GPUs churn through billions of combinations per second to brute force the SHA-512 hashes and reveal the plain text root password. If cracking fails, attackers look for lower-effort targets. They frequently find clear text passwords left in .bash history logs, OpenVPN configuration files, or text documents saved directly to a desktop. A single read permission error on a critical system file bypasses millions of dollars in perimeter defenses, granting the attacker full administrative authority over the system. The second vector targets the sudo command. Sudo is a utility designed to delegate authority safely, allowing standard users to run administrative commands without needing the root password. Attackers weaponize this through shell escaping. If a user is granted passwordless sudo rights to run a basic text editor like Vim, an attacker can use built-in editor commands to drop directly into an interactive root shell. They can also abuse intended system functionality. A binary like wget is strictly meant to download files from the internet. If it can be run with pseudo privileges, an attacker can manipulate its parameters to exfiltrate restricted internal files instead. Then there are environment variable misconfigurations, specifically LD preload. When attackers run sudo-l, they might see the environment variable LD preload is being preserved. To understand why this is dangerous, we have to look at dynamic linking. When a legitimate application runs, it doesn't contain all its own code. Instead, it requests standard shared library files from the core operating system to function. The LD preload variable acts as an override. It forces the dynamic linker to load a custom shared library before the standard ls libraries are called. An attacker exploits this by writing a tiny C program. They include the setGID0 and setUID0 commands, which refer to root privileges, and then instruct the system to spawn a command line. They compile this code into a shared library object and use LD preload to execute it alongside any valid sudo command. Sudo vulnerabilities turn carefully constructed administration tools into the exact weapons used to compromise the machine. While permissions and sudo attacks rely on human configuration errors, the third vector targets the foundation. Kernel exploits leverage architectural flaws written into the core operating system. To execute a kernel attack, an attacker runs the uname-a command to verify the exact core version of the operating system. They then cross-reference that build against known vulnerability databases. A definitive real-world example of this is the Dirty Cow exploit, tracked as CVE 2016-5195. It existed in the Linux kernel for nearly a decade before discovery. To execute Dirty Cow, an attacker transfers a malicious C script to the target server and compiles it locally using a standard compiler like GCC. Once executed, the exploit abuses a race condition deep within the kernel's memory subsystem. By forcing the system to rapidly process conflicting memory instructions, the attacker forcefully overwrites read-only files, injecting a root account directly into etc password. Kernel vulnerabilities are a severe structural failure. They grant absolute control, bypassing mathematically perfect user configurations. Privilege escalation is a predictable exploitation of excessive permissions and unpatched architectures. To defend against it, security teams must deploy targeted countermeasures. The first defensive pillar is identity and access. Organizations must rigorously enforce the principle of least privilege and zero trust architecture to eliminate local administrator sprawl and ensure no user has more access than their immediate tasks require. The second pillar is monitoring. Security information and event management, or SIEM solutions, must be deployed to actively detect behavioral anomalies that signify an escalation attempt is in progress. A SIEM must be configured to flag specific indicators, unexpected modifications to automated cron jobs, and attackers spawning an interactive shell from a text editor, or a GCC compiler suddenly executing code on a production web server. The third pillar is hygiene. This requires aggressive patch management to eliminate kernel vulnerabilities, alongside routine, automated audits to ensure critical file permissions remain locked down. Defenders must adopt a meticulous procedural mindset. An IT team must secure thousands of individual configurations perfectly. An attacker only needs to find one single error to own the entire domain. Aggressively closing that configuration gap is the only reliable way to stop an initial, low-level intrusion from ending